Hello, welcome everyone to CAPIS's monthly research briefing. I'm Ed O'Dowd, and we're excited to have a research call today, our first one of 2026. So happy New Year to everyone, and we're already kind of a couple weeks into the year with a lot of things going on headline-wise. It's a great call today that we have with Markets Policy Partners, and they are definitely the right people to have on as we kick off January when you look at what's going on with the kind of the geopolitical landscape, what's going on here domestically, what's happened internationally and is happening internationally. So we're excited to have those guys on here again. John Fagan, welcome.
Thanks for having us on again, Ed. It's always great to be here, and thanks to everybody who's joined the call.
And Brendan Walsh is also joining us from Markets Policy Partners.
Yeah,
Brendan?
excited to be here. Looking forward to the year.
Yeah, we are too. It's hopefully going to be a great year. But this is kind of in your bailiwick, what's been going on lately. We have other research vendors that we work with on our monthly research briefings, some that are maybe a little bit more technical analysis, fundamental, but to start the year off, it's definitely right in your zone. So I don't know whether it's what's gone on with the political unrest. I know you'll talk about interest rates, so I'll let you guys kind of steer this and talk about whatever you think is germane to our audience. So take it away, guys.
Yeah, that's right. It's a target-rich environment if you're a
Yes.
macro guy like us. Yeah. So 2026, ready or not, here it is, and was fast out of the gates, no question about it. So just before we get going, obviously there's so much going on the macro side. If you want to follow up with us directly, go to marketspolicy.com. We can talk about our newsletter and so forth, and always have time for clients, potential clients, et cetera. So kicking it off, when Brendan and I look at the macro backdrop, with the U.S. at the center of it here. Obviously, the organizing principle is that this is an election year. This is the midterms, and so much of what is going to be coming out of the White House in terms of policy and other executive decision making is going to be oriented toward maximizing the chances of electoral success for the Republican Party in the midterms in November. And obviously, as we all know, this is traditionally a president loses the majorities that they come in with if they did come in with those majorities, like President Trump did in his second term here. And the second term is, this dynamic can be magnified in the second term, and the polling, et cetera, shows President Trump and Republicans underwater. We've seen some of these elections that are coming, these off-cycle elections and so forth, producing results that haven't been encouraging for the Republican Party. So they've got some ground to make up. And so the organizing principle, as we said, is about the executive branch trying to push policies and decisions to maximize Republican electoral success chances in the midterms. And that really centers on the economy. Run the economy hot is what the Trump administration wants to do into this midterm. That is their best chance. It's their best argument. It's, that's what's going to ultimately bring them to electoral success if they're able to achieve it. And so that's kind of the lens that we see everything through. Obviously there are going to be other considerations, but that is going to be a very prime motivation, and is a lens through which we can view so many of these macro topics that we're going to be covering. So obviously, running the economy hot. How do you do that from the Trump administration perspective? Well, some of it's already been laid in terms of the groundwork with the big beautiful bill and the article of faith in Washington D.C. among the Republicans and among the Trump administration is that these tax cuts are going to be feeding through and going to be hitting refunds into businesses and households early this year, and that is going to juice the economy. I think all else being equal, that is hard to refute. I think under the circumstances, though, the question is the degree of uncertainty that we're seeing, particularly in small businesses, high enough that that money is hoarded rather than invested, rather than used to hire new talent, whether or spend in other ways. So that's the big question. Is uncertainty too high for these tax cut rebates to have the juice that they typically have? So we're going to be monitoring that. We think that that is going to at least probably dull some of the impact of the big beautiful bill and the fiscal impulse that it should be putting through the economy. all else being equal, but it's not equal. Small businesses in particular are very uncertain, particularly in the face of some of the other elements we're going to be talking about. You can see it in the labor market data here. I mean, Brendan, we talked a little bit before about this, and the labor market data that came out today shows, no hiring, no firing, people just hunkered down.
Yeah, 100%. It's very much that type of jobs market. Actually, outside of hospitals and healthcare, which has been the driver of growth here or it was in 2025. Also, which is a good sign too. Hospitality and leisure hiring have remained fairly strong, which is a good sign for the overall economy.
Yeah, and so our view is that the economy in 2026 is likely to be better, but not as much better as it maybe could be if there weren't some other elements playing around. So let's talk about some of those elements that are inducing uncertainty. Right at top of mind is independence of the Fed. Right now, if you're talking about trying to run the economy hot, that is in the minds of a number of Trump administration officials, if not Trump himself. Well, probably almost certainly Trump himself, is you got to cut rates into right now as aggressively as possible to juice the economy and markets into the midterms. And the all of the pressure and now legalistic threats against the Fed, the ongoing case with Lisa Cook. This is all designed to essentially give the executive and the Trump executive and the Trump team more sway over monetary policy on an easing direction. That is nothing new. That's nothing that anybody doesn't know, but it's just the fact that the intensity is dialed up. But we subscribe to the view that this latest attempt was a bit likely, it seems, to backfire rather than to be forward to the administration's goals, right? So, there are a variety of reasons why, as we all saw, the markets didn't overreact. First of all, is kind of the taco trade, that formulation. Trump always comes out with guns blazing, but then can back off and retreat pretty strategically when met with opposition. And he was met with some pretty clear opposition here, and some powerful opposition. Obviously, it seemed as though the Senate, with Senator Tillis in particular on the banking committee, right, Brendan, without his say so, no
Yeah, he's
candidates were
very
coming up.
important on the Senate Finance. Any Fed nominee has to go through them first before it even gets to a vote on the floor. And he said that, he wouldn't allow any process to nominate the new Fed until this whole investigation is done.
Yeah, and the idea of, in general, let's face it, in general, these kind of retribution style investigations haven't really amounted to much. Think of Comey and that sort of stuff. These legal cases have really been challenged, and it's tough to see this really getting going when you look at the merits of kind of what they're alleging. Cost overruns being a criminal. If cost overruns were, I heard somebody joke, if cost overruns for renovations were a criminal offense in Washington, D.C., then the entire city it would just be a penal colony. So anyway, also,
But the one thing that this could result in is if Fed Powell's chairmanship ends, in a few months, but his term does not end. He still has a seat on the board, which under normal circumstances he certainly would have retired and gone off into enjoy whatever it is he enjoys. But now there is actually a raising chance that Powell gets stubborn and says, "All right, I'm gonna serve this next. It's almost 2 years out." And
right.
and he would be voting on the FOMC. It could be very much a thorn in the new chair's side.
Right. So with the Senate saying we're not going to confirm a patsy and you have to back off Powell, and the likelihood that Powell actually sticks around after his term as chair is over, creates the possibility that the Fed is even more independent after this
Yeah,
particular issue.
because
But
that's
this
the part that I think is being lost on the administration is the chair of the Fed doesn't set rates. He or she leads a group of people who vote on it, and each one is allowed their own vote.
Yeah, and so Fed fund futures are now basically unchanged, right? 50 basis points.
Yeah.
The likelihood is it probably gets kicked off with the new governor in place. I mean, the new chair in place in the after the April meeting, and
And
so
across a lot
that's
of the big banks, even some of them have taken rate cuts off the board for the entire year.
right. Yeah, and if you're running the economy hot, and the economy is in a bit of an upswing through the early part of 2026, rate cut, the case for rate cuts gets harder to make. But the Supreme Court is that X factor here, and the oral arguments around the Lisa Cook case and the background of that is the question. The point of legal question before the Supreme Court is the authority of the executive to hire and fire for cause, whatever that cause might be, for to independent agency officials, in particular in this case in the Fed. And the Supreme Court is expected to side with the to actually take the case against the administration and and support the concept of Fed independence by uh, essentially establishing, a precedent that the Fed is kind of a different animal than other agencies, other independent agencies. It's more independent than the other independent agencies. It has a
Yeah,
longer
and it
tradition.
technically is.
Yeah, it has a
There's nothing
private.
like the Fed in any other federal agency. It does have that independence, and especially the regional, Fed, that's a collection of banks that elect their presidents.
Yeah, and when you see the way in which kind of the political winds are blowing, I mean, you don't want to be too cynical about the Supreme Court, although cynicism about the Supreme Court can sometimes point you to the right outcome. And the idea that something like this is an anathema to Wall Street and sort of, find any, dyed-in-the-wool capitalist that thinks that a pliant and non-independent a Fed is a great idea for the economy. I don't think that you'd find too many of them. So the Fed. So I think that there are lots of probably whispers around the periphery of the Supreme Court that this would be doing the administration a favor by ruling against them. We'll get back to that theme of the Supreme Court potentially doing the administration a favor by ruling against them. But we'll in the context of tariffs, but we'll get to that in just a minute. So suffice to say, the likelihood is that we agree with the conventional wisdom that the Fed is, and this has been our longstanding call, that the Fed is going to prevent the executive from a ability to hire and fire Fed governors, and so we're going to end up with a situation in which Fed Chair Powell stays on as a governor, and the likelihood is that the Senate confirms one of the what do you think? One of the Kevin Warsh? What's the odds on money right now? Hassett is maybe a little bit too pliant for the administration for the Senate at this point.
Yeah, I still think it's too early. He's talking to a few other, Wall Street investors, kind of out of the blue. So, also,
Yeah,
I
that's
do
right.
think that this new kind of situation, changes things a bit. That you can't just expect. I think honestly, I have no idea. It could be, in my opinion, anybody.
Yeah, and in some ways, it matters a lot less now
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
the spotlight is on it. Fed Chair Powell is probably going to stick around in the governor's position. There's going to be a
yeah.
lot more heels
It,
dug in on the committee,
right,
and
and some of the bigger names might actually not want the job.
right, yeah, yeah. Besant, when you look at the way that the cabinet and sort of the executive branch officials have been arrayed around this, Besant has always been against monkeying with the Fed, and that came out again. And so this seems to have bubbled up from kind of the Pulte B squad, C squad of
Yeah,
the
and from what we
administration.
know in terms of the people that came in and filled the various departments, Bassett really has risen to the top, and the administration very much relies on him and the Treasury to do a lot of the things that they're doing, and more importantly, on his opinion on a lot of these things.
Yeah. So just to sum up, so far, fiscal impulse through the big beautiful bill will provide an uplift to the economy, but not perhaps as good as it could be given the degree of uncertainty. Fed independence, the attempts to erode it have backfired to some extent in our view, and you're going to end up with a Fed that is on a pretty steady course, and 50 basis points seems about right if they get that in, and the risks appear now to be on the downside rather than the upside on that easing. option. Let's get into the tariffs. So the tariffs, obviously, we've had the lots of speculation about how the Supreme Court is going to come down on this Emergency Powers Act, the IEPA
We
authority.
thought we would have heard by now.
And that really is the issue. So lots of I disclaimer, I am a lawyer, but I haven't taken I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I haven't taken con law in 25 years. So take it with a grain of salt, but armchair legal expert, there are plenty of people weighing in on this, but you know this seems pretty unscientific. But if you've got something that's as clear cut as the IEPA, and you really have to torture the language to come out on the side of the Trump administration, like torture it. And so ruling against the administration would be easy and quick. And so every time that every day that goes by that the Supreme Court does not issue this opinion, it was supposed to, remember, it was supposed to come out on Friday. It didn't come out on Friday. They said it was supposed to come out on Wednesday, yesterday. It didn't come out yesterday or earlier this week. I can't remember. So now people are saying, if you're going to write the slam dunk easy opinion, it writes itself. You read the text, you interpret it clearly, and you rule against the administration. That would be a fast decision. The fact that it's taking time is making people think, oh my gosh, they're going to rule in favor of the administration. And they've got to, they're taking the reason that it's taking so much longer to get this decision out is because they are tying themselves into legal pretzels to interpret this thing in favor of the executive. Now, that's possible. There are whole lot of different ways that rather than just straight up ruling in favor of the Trump administration's position on this, they can come up with all these different kinds of shades of gray. And that's kind of what we expect. We expect this kind of continuum of, send it to into the International Trade Court and, we'll, and consider the other alternative authorities that the executive has. The likelihood now is that it's going to be kind of a dog's breakfast. But to be perfectly honest, if the Supreme Court rules against the Trump administration on tariffs, this is revisiting our motif from the Lisa Cook case. If they rule against them, it might be doing the administration a backhanded favor. Now, why would that be? Especially if you have Bessent and Trump vociferously warning the Supreme Court that it would be a big mess if they disallowed the authority for these tariffs to go through, particularly if they rule that these are now retroactively in need of being paid back. What is it, $133 billion that they've taken in under this that they would then be kicking out? Well, let's go back to the overarching theme of running the economy hot into the elections. You can see these rebates as a stimulus check to businesses, right? And it wouldn't be, and Bessent has said, hey, we would have no problem. The Treasury would have no problem paying this out. Guess what? If the Treasury is dumping $133 billion of essentially tax rebates, which is what this would be, into small businesses and other companies that have been hit by the tariffs, then
some big ones too.
Yeah, that's pretty big. That's pretty stimulative. And so honestly, I think the Supreme Court will probably fall short of granting this this sort of backhanded win to the administration, which could be seen as stimulus. But it's one to watch. And my expectation is that the Supreme Court basically says, well, he may not have all the authority under IEPA. We need to go in case by case and sort this out, and we have to look if there's an alternate authority and blah blah blah. I think it's going to be a really muddy decision and a messy decision, which is why it's taking so long rather than a clean one way or the other. But
it is a good point that the headline is like, oh, this is bad, but when you look at the reality of it, certainly not great for the treasury market, but it's not necessarily bad for other risk markets because it would be stimulative checks that kind of came out of nowhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so you can see, if you were conspiracy minded, the idea of Bessent, protesting is sort of like that old, don't throw me in the briar patch, please don't rule against us. We would hate that. It also gives the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court rules against, the Supreme Court has been getting a lot of flack for being too favorable to the Trump administration. And if they, put their line in the sand here with the tariff case and Lisa Cook case, that will bolster their argument that they are indeed, above politics and,
Yeah.
interpreting the law and that sort of stuff.
And
So,
it is important. If the Supreme Court rules against them, there are other means to, still put tariffs on various countries,
oh
which
yeah,
I do think we would do down the road. But going back to the midterm election, I think they would we'd wait till the to midterms before we got back into the tariffing, other than on, very specific issues like, if you trade with Iran, things like that. Yeah.
yeah.
OFAC.
And so geopolitically, looking at oil and Venezuela and Iran through the lens of this run it hot and focus on wins ahead of the midterms, what does the Trump administration want? They want lower oil prices. The Venezuela caper clearly is designed to get supply. It's a supply driven adventure, and in our hemisphere, as well as being a geostrategic and tactical win, and something that the administration can boast about, at least in terms of the military success, and in terms of the getting supply onto the market, monkeying with the Venezuelan out. It's so low, right? And the reserves are at least supposedly so high. You can make the case that even if this is a multi-year campaign that maybe even goes nowhere, based on the feedback that you got from like the ExxonMobil CEO saying it's like what everybody really knows is that at the moment it's kind of uninvestable, but it might not stay that way, and you can certainly see possibilities, but the upside risk for adventures in Venezuela for oil isn't all that high, and the downside risk is probably more meaningful, at least particularly over the medium to longer term. The same formulation does not apply to Iran, and the idea of having a U.S. weigh in and further destabilize Iran, try to bring down the regime with a bombing campaign, presumably in coordination with Israel and so forth. Really dropping the gloves and trying to see these guys out of power in Iran. One would presume that that has much higher likelihood of blowback in terms of chaos in the Straits of Hormuz, the Iranian supply coming off the market, which is more consequential than Venezuelan supply. And so, it's not. It's certainly the Trump administration is unpredictable by design in certain ways, but one would guess that the Iran situation, given the interest in the persistent and durable interest in the Trump administration of keeping oil prices low, particularly into the midterms, means that this is more saber rattling than and warning and verbal, rather than ballistic. So time will tell, but that's our view on it through the lens that we're operating on. Greenland and Greenland, Cuba, some of the other places, place your bets. I mean, from our perspective, Cuba is probably there would be a lot more difficulty in terms of the U.S. taking an aggressive posture toward Greenland, given NATO and the all kinds of considerations up there. But the Venezuelan operation is seen by geostrategic experts as an attempt to isolate Cuba and put pressure on that regime, and the political benefit of having something happen in Cuba would be presumably higher than anything that we could get done in Greenland. So I would be watching, and Marco Rubio obviously has much a bigger axe to grind with Cuba than than with Greenland, where he has none. So this is something that is, watch this space. Cuba is also not producing oil. It's not consequential in global financial markets. It's straight up Donroe, the Donald Trump Monroe Doctrine version of global strategy. So I would certainly be watching my back if I were in Havana. Uh, let's see. Last but not least, sort of a grab bag, sort of a populist potpourri of policies. The I'm talking about the cap on credit cards, 10%, the Fannie and Freddie buybacks, the prohibition of private equity to buy houses, and I'm sure that there are others. But let me kick it over to Brendan to talk about this. This is, again, it's we call it kind of populist potpourri. It's sort of flailing policies. They're throwing a lot of spaghetti against the wall to try to get the economy in a better shape ahead of the elections. But Brendan, are these are likely to prove out in any sort of meaningful, substantive way, or are they just
Right.
announcements?
So a lot of the stuff we talk about is big picture, but in terms of ones that do affect directly individual companies, is the Credit Card Competition Act is having a hard time. This one, it would require a second network to be on the transaction to give the merchant the option over Visa and MasterCard. If that happened, actually, it would be a huge win for Capital One because really there's nobody else to compete. But this is having a very, very hard time even kind of making it out of committee. No one particularly wants to vote on this. A couple of senators, Durbin has been, making this his kind of career choice, but it is a bipartisan bill. But this is not really a bipartisan issue. It kind of depends on who, if the largest company in your district is a bank or if it's a Walmart kind of thing. So people don't want to vote on this. It got taken up recently by the president, but he had a chance yesterday in the speech to kind of put his weight behind it, but he actually didn't even mention it. And then the other one is the idea of a 10% cap on all credit card transactions. That is just an idea. There's actually no bill on that. Uh, Johnson and everybody else kind of on the Senate committee as kind of said all the same things that a bank would say of why it's a bad idea. So I think that the odds of these two getting passed are very, 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 very small. So in terms of the weakness that you saw in the credit card companies and also the Visa and Mastercard, so those are risks that I just don't see coming to fruition. A lot of the president's desire, kind of this speculation here, is he does want the crypto bill to be passed, and in that crypto bill is kind of a way for crypto companies to pay interest on their stable coins, and that's kind of having hangups. So I think he was putting these two ideas out there as a threat to the banking industry, who very much opposes that. But the crypto bill is actually having a very hard time. Even today, the CEO of Coinbase came out against it. So that would look like it was fairly close to being done, and now it's in disarray. But in terms of actionable, things that you can do on the stock market, those are two ones that do directly affect individual companies.
There's so much going on. I know there are other headlines, but let's pause there for questions and
Yeah.
thoughts. Anything from the audience, we would
Yeah.
be happy to try to answer.
Absolutely. No, there was a lot to take in, and I know we could keep going because there's just so much. But if anybody from the audience has a question for John or Brendan, please put it into the chat and I will read it to them. So don't be bashful. Let's dive into one of these issues they discussed, or maybe something else that we didn't bring up. One question I had is I thought when the tariffs were originally floated, one of the ideas or benefits would be to pay down the national debt. But then I stopped hearing about that, and it became more recently. I've heard maybe every American can get a dividend check or kind of like a stimulus check back. But we moved away from the idea of paying down the national debt. Is that something that you think it just doesn't seem like anyone takes it seriously until
Well,
we
I
revisit the debt ceiling again.
Well, I think it's definitely left the kind of key considerations from the administration's communications on tariffs, but I don't think it has receded from the minds of Treasury market investors. I would
Oh,
think that if and obviously we would see this if, in fact, the Supreme Court came out with a full-throated repudiation of the administration's position that they can levy tariffs under the emergency, and they have to retroactively peel them all off and pay everybody
mhm.
back. I think that it would test the proposition that you're bringing up, that these have been disregarded as a fiscal, as any sort of any way fiscally important in the reaction to a decision like that by the Supreme Court. I think that there's a sense that the tariff revenue has kind of stayed, maybe not top of mind, but in the back of people's minds and bond investors' minds
Mhm.
as a like a little bit of a security blanket
Sure.
about the fiscal situation because it was in a formulation to offset essentially some of the revenue lost in the big beautiful bill, and I think that although it isn't I think, put forward all that forcefully by the administration anymore, particularly because I think the administration is smart enough. They don't want to highlight this issue because they don't want a Treasury reaction or an
Mhm.
adverse Treasury reaction. Now, if Bessent were out there saying like, we can't balance the budget, our budgets are, we're going to be fiscally screwed if we can't do this,
Right.
then that would up the risk that the market would get freaked out by an adverse decision by the Treasury. So I think in some ways maybe that is part of the explanation that they don't want to they don't want to poke that bear
Right.
in case it wakes up after the Supreme Court decision.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. We do have something popping up here in terms of a Q&A. Any potential or any insights of potential government shutdown again on January 31st? Haven't heard
Great
much.
question. Yeah, that was one of the topics that we
I
didn't
actually
cover that we
forgot
should have.
about
Yeah.
that. That's a big risk.
Hey, I mean, all I know is I didn't have to worry when I went to the airport. I was flying during that time and I got lucky, but yeah, that's a yeah, please.
So where do we stand, Brendan? We've got some spending bills coming that are getting through. So it's been a piecemeal approach.
Yeah, but there is a fairly high chance that we do end up shutting down again.
Is it going to be parts? Is this going to be certain parts of the government that shut down and other parts that remain open? Is this going to be more of a nuanced? There's a lot of uncertainty around what we've got here, but you know, it seems to me that the Democrats, the when you look at the first government shutdown, the Democratic Party has to look back at that and say that was a win for us. We got people, although there was a lot of hand wringing on the left when Chuck Schumer and company bowed down and eventually conceded and let things go forward. They had focused in their minds the public attention on the question of healthcare and on the question of rising healthcare premiums without the subsidies that the Republicans were blocking for the ACA. So the uh, if you're gonna be in position to have a shutdown, you know what is the point that you're trying to make, right? As a Democrat, if you're if you're going to be putting your line in the sand and saying, we have to have at least some sort of partial government shutdown, based on some sort of issue. I would think that it would have to be funding for a homeland security, right? I
Yeah, I
mean,
agree.
given that would have to be it, right?
Yeah.
Given what is happening in Minneapolis, the Democrats would stand up and say, we can't in good conscience, sign on for this funding because of this, that, and the other thing. And it focuses the public's attention on it. And I think that is where the risk resides. Now, the attention is pretty focused on that anyway. So I'm not sure how much additional juice the Democrats really get out of doing that. Um, and if you're, in public, the public tends to blame the executive, but government shutdowns aren't popular for anyone, and we just had one. So I think it's a really tough call at this point.
Yeah.
Um,
It's there's so many balls in the air that it's kind of difficult to say whether it's going to happen or not, but that does raise the possibility that a mistake is made and we actually do screw it up and shut down.
And I do think that, they run the risk also. The one that hits the American public the hardest is, and at least maybe this is myself because I travel for work, is the FAA
Yeah.
and TSA agents. And I could tell you right now, whether you were left or right, people were flipping out. And it became scary to like, do I go to the airport today? Am I going to be there for 6 hours? I remember flying during that time. Again, I got lucky, but a lot of people didn't. And it came to where everybody was looking at Washington like, get this figured out. Like, dig your line in the sand in another area. Or another way to look at it is the FBI gets paid during a government shutdown. They're not subject to this. Can we put the FAA under the clause of like national security, where it's such a big deal when you start grounding flights that it, in some ways, maybe does damage national security. I don't know. There are people with a lot of important reasons to fly every day in this country. Could that be where we just pay FAA and take that off? Then the American public won't care as much, or unless
Yeah,
there's another area that I'm missing. But I'm
you
just,
can see why
yeah,
the leadership of the Democratic Party would want that pressure point there. I mean, that was one of the things, as you say, it got people's attention. At the
yeah,
same
Yeah.
time,
It doesn't
Schumer
work
and
unless people are pissed off.
yeah, I mean, they're pretty cautious, and they know the American public is dealing with a lot right now, and that adding another layer of concern, stress, and difficulty may not be the right solution.
right.
I it's really hard to call this one. My guess would be that uh, the chance of a shutdown is less than 50-50, but still
Yeah, I
quite
would put
quite
it below,
appreciable.
but yeah.
Makes sense. All right, gentlemen. Well, I do not see that we have any more questions, so I think we could probably wrap it up right here. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us on. Thanks to everybody that joined the call. And yeah, you can find us online at marketspolicy.com. We've got a webcast, we've got a macrocast, sorry, a podcast called the Macrocast that we do with Forbes Tate, the lobbying giant here in Washington D.C. And that's a lot of fun for us every week. And encourage you
Okay.
to listen to that.
We can access that through your website or YouTube.
It's on Spotify, Apple, and
Oh, okay.
all the podcasts. It's the macro, one word, Macrocast.
Macrocast. All right, nice. Very cool. And I, like you mentioned earlier, anybody on the call that we've invited on, if you'd like to speak with Brendan or John, saying, hey, I'd like to have these conversations more often, or get your input on maybe some fixed income positions or whatever it might be, just like looking at rates, things that can help you make better investment decisions. Get in touch with us or get in touch with them directly, and they can craft kind of a one-on-one relationship and maybe help you as an institutional investor. Definitely like to see that happening with the people we have on the call. So next month, we're going to do fair lead strategies. We're going to have Katie Stockton back. And for those who have joined us for her calls in the past, you know it's technical analysis. So it's a little different way of looking at things. So we're excited to have her on Thursday, February 19th. So we'll be in touch on invites as we get closer. Uh, Thank you everyone for joining today. Appreciate it. Have a great day. Take care.